Hello, we're Natalie and Abby, and you are listening to The Sensational Life with Bibic.
Join us to explore the many layers of life through unique and inspiring topics each week. Whether you're looking to better support yourself or others, we're here to provide insights, practical tips, and meaningful conversations.
Bibic is a national charity dedicated to empowering children and young adults with brain injuries, disabilities, and neurological or developmental challenges. We're both part of a fantastic team of developmental therapists. While our title might sound a bit fancy, it really just means that we're here to support children, young adults, and families with helpful strategies for any challenges that they encounter.
There may be times we cover some difficult topics during this podcast, but we will always give you prior warning of this. We'll have some wonderful guest speakers joining us, and we can't wait to hear from you with all your questions and your own stories. Together, we can create a more inclusive and understanding world, one episode at a time.
Hi, welcome to our first podcast. We're really excited to be here. Not quite sure how it's going to go, but please bear with us while we get to grips with what this is. So just to let you know a little bit about us, my name is Abby. I come from a teaching background, so I taught in primary schools for 10 years, mostly in infants, some in juniors. And then I came away from teaching and I worked at an after-school science club and was the assistant manager there. And then I felt that more things could be done to support those children that needed a bit more help. And so I found Bibic, or Bibic found me, I suppose. And then I've been there for about a year now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm Natalie, and a little bit about me is I'm now one of our senior therapists here at Bibic. A bit of my background, I studied to be a teacher, so very similar to Abby. However, once I finished my degree, I decided to do a bit of volunteering, which my mum actually, she guided me towards Bibic to do some volunteering, get some experience, and I've not left ever since. I originally started as one of the family services coordinators, and then slowly worked my way through to become a therapist. And now I support in managing part of the therapy team, and I also do some of our marketing as well, which I really enjoy.
You're a lady with many hats. So today we're going to be talking about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn personality types. So obviously the fight and flight are heard of a lot. And when we talk about these personality types, it's when that overwhelm comes in and these personality types kick in. So you've got the fight element where you might see that emotional outburst, that anger, the pushing people away, and things like that. And
so the flight response, we often see when you have those individuals that tend to sort of run away and hide, want to withdraw. So we often talk about these as well in terms of how they can be affected around the sensory system too. So if you think you go into sensory overload or overwhelm, you can find that actually this is a trigger for this fight, flight, freeze, fawn response.
yeah, absolutely. The freeze is that kind of deer in headlights moment where the children or young adults, but to be honest, even adults will go into, I don't quite know what to do, almost go statue-like, they're not responding. And it tends to be that defense mechanism of, if I do nothing, I nothing's going to happen. And it's later that you then get that kind of like emotional outburst or the release of like those emotions afterwards.
And then the last one that's not really often spoke about, and we do often dive into it within our assessments, is the fawn response. Now, this is the body's ability to sort of hide or mask as such. So you can use terms such as masking in this, but it's slightly different type of masking that we often commonly link to autism. So fawn is basically our brain's ability to hide and lessen the response of our emotions. So for example, if you're feeling overwhelmed or worried or sad or angry and someone asks you a simple question of, are you okay? You often respond with, no, I'm fine, I'm absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with me. And that's your fawn response. So it's actually your brain's ability to hide your vulnerability in terms of
Mm.
your emotions.
It's like that people pleaser kind of,
Yeah.
no, everything's fine, because I don't want anyone to know that I'm not okay on the inside. So I'm going to just say that everything's all right and I'll carry on doing what people ask me to do.
Mm.
Whereas on the inside, you are in that turmoil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're not going to dive too much into sensory processing, because we do have a lot of things like our live Q&A still up on our Facebook around sensory processing, and we will do a series on sensory processing. But just to give a little bit of that background, so obviously you've got your senses, so your 5 traditional senses that everyone knows, so your touch, hearing,
Taste.
always forget, your taste, your
The sight, the hearing, the taste, the touch, and the smell.
yes.
Yes.
And you then also have your proprioception, your interoception, and your vestibular system. Now, the reason I wanted to bring these up quickly is because these sometimes can be the reason for individuals to fall into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. Now, if you think individuals of any potential difficulties, especially if they have sensory challenges, they often will find themselves going into that sensory overwhelm or over arousal, which then can kickstart the brain into this fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. A really handy person to look into is a gentleman called Dan Siegel, who does the hand model of the brain. If you could see me, I would have my thumb folded over into the palm of my hand and my 4 fingers folded over the top of that. And he uses this example of how our brain, our amygdala, when it's producing adrenaline, so when it's in that sense of overwhelm, our executive functioning, which again we will dive into, can disengage, and we often see that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response in those moments. So that's why I thought it's worth just adding that in a little bit.
Is that on the Bibic website? Because we've got a really handy resources page, haven't we? So if it's not up there, I think that'll be a really handy one to go and have a look at, because it does give a really good visual overview of what happens.
Yeah, definitely. And we also have, we'll just plug it a little bit here, but we also have our support and advice line as well. So it might be something, if you're thinking of a scenario that your child does or anything like that, and you're like, do you know what, it'd be really helpful, but you can just look up Dan Siegel on YouTube, and he's got some amazing videos that dive a little bit more into it.
So Natalie touched on it a minute ago, this term executive function, and this is what our series of this series of podcasts is going to be about. And executive function is in control of a whole heap of things, which is why we're going to split it up into each episode, which will cover a different thing. But what is executive function? What on earth are you on about, Abby and Natalie? So executive function lives in your frontal lobe, and it is in control of your in the moment thinking. So you've got things like your organization, your planning, your task initiation, your prioritizing, that impulse control, your emotional control, your ability to think flexibly, working memory, self-monitoring. So if something's going wrong, can you change the way that you're thinking? It's in control, like I said, of a whole lot.
And I think as well, the executive functioning, it falls into so many different areas. So commonly we talk about executive functioning when it comes to things like autism and ADHD, but it also, individuals with dyslexia also can have difficulties with their executive functioning. Now, they haven't done lots and lots of research around executive function in terms of the potential delays in with neurodiversities and difficulties and things like that. However, we often use the base level that there was a study that was done on individuals with ADHD, where they looked at the potential delay in the executive function. Now, when I say delay, I'm not talking in terms of sort of developmental delay or anything like that. I'm just talking in terms of the effectiveness of the executive functioning working. Now, they proved in ADHD that the executive function was 3 to 5 years behind. Now, if you take a 10-year-old, for example, that's potentially meaning that their executive function is running that of a 7 to 5-year-old. Now you think, taking into consideration emotional control, impulse control, task initiation, if you've got a 10-year-old and they're actually working in terms of those elements to a 5 to 7-year-old, you're going to see some big disparities. So we often find in assessments, don't we, that parents come in and go, well, I don't understand though, they're 10, they're 12, they're
Should be doing these
yeah,
things.
they should
Yeah.
they should be able to pack their bag. Why are they having such large emotional outbursts and things like that? When actually we often talk about the executive functioning. Now, when you think about someone with ADHD, they often are individuals that are quite impulsive. They struggle with sort of task initiation and things like that. And then an individual with autism, they often struggle with sort of rigid thinking, sort of literal interpretation. And these all can fall in within that sort of executive functioning side of things.
I was going to say that you can often see it the other way around, can't you? Which is that's what causes the confusion. So someone who has got autistic traits can also be quite impulsive because of them, and then with ADHD, they can be quite rigid with their thinking as well.
And we often find, so within our assessments, we now complete pro formas where we look at sort of more in detail about where the behaviours are coming from, what's sort of causing the behaviours. And this is now why we use the pro formas in our assessments, because it gives us the opportunities to have more open conversations, because screeners often provide sort of that structured sentence, doesn't it? And we found that a lot of parents were having difficulties because there is such crossover with executive functioning. They were finding it quite difficult to unpick whether the individual is literal, and how can you rate that from 1 to 5, for example. Whereas actually with our proformas, we can ask about literal interpretation, but we can unpick it a little bit more. Is it literal when it comes to socialization? Is it more literal when it comes to jokes? And what actually is that, and why is it? So it gives us more of an opportunity to really delve
It
deeper.
gives that holistic view as well,
Yeah.
rather than that box ticking exercise and trying to force people to, well, not force people, but you've got a limited amount of options, haven't you,
Yeah.
on with the screeners, whereas this gives us that much more holistic big view of where their difficulties might be stemming from, and whether it is traits relating to autism or ADHD, or whether it might even be something else.
Yeah, and you think especially with dyslexia, so an individual with dyslexia may be more commonly being quite impulsive, or they may struggle with their word finding, they may struggle with initiating that task, which could look like ADHD. However, a lot of the times it can come down to the executive functioning side of things. So that's again obviously going into a little bit about our assessments for you. When we do a 2-day assessment, we have the opportunity to build that holistic view, because we can look at the portfolio if there is questions around dyslexia, or even if there isn't, we can do things like the RIT that looks at underlying ability. We can look at
Like the word finding and things like that, can't we? Yeah.
processing, working memory. So we have that ability to build on sort of looking at which parts are a challenge, but also which parts are a strength, because it's not to say there is always going to be deficits and difficulties. You might have someone that's incredible at processing but struggles a little bit more with their short-term working memory. Now, obviously that's difficult. We have the opportunity where we
Yeah.
can do our assessments and we can really delve into that. So as parents, obviously you don't have hundreds and hundreds of pounds to invest in all these testings and things like that, whereas just looking at the day-to-day side of things when it comes to executive function, what specifically things during that day are they struggling with? Are they struggling with packing their bag? Is it that they're, I don't know, really impulsive? Or a simple thing like we often talk about the tidying the room
Oh,
scenario.
yeah, absolutely. And not being able to break down that task. So outside of the moment, because remember, executive function is that in the moment thinking. So you know that they know how to tidy their bedroom. They've done it with you many, many times before. And you go, could you just go and tidy your bedroom? And they go, okay. And you come and find them and they're sat in the middle of their bedroom floor and they've done nothing. And it's not because they don't know how to do it, but in the moment, that planning and that organization hasn't kicked in with that executive function, so they don't know how to break down the task, and it just seems too big for them. So we often advise to like I said, break it down, give them those smaller tasks. So can you put your clothes away? Can you put your dirty clothes in the washing basket? Put those toys in that box. And then they will do it. It's just that planning and organisation hasn't kicked in for them.
And I always find as well that it's far easier to be destructive than constructive. So you think it's far easier to walk into a room, I don't know, and get all your toys out, or if you're doing a craft, get all the bits out for the crafting. So I know that's not technically destructive, but sort of getting things
It's
out
still
and
making that mess,
yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
making the mess. And so rather than when it comes to tidying up, you think actually you have to really consider and think about where everything has come from. And sometimes that's where you find the difficulties, because you'll be like, well, they can get everything out and it can go everywhere. But when it comes to tidying it up, it's how will we put it all back together?
It's if I said to you as adult, can you wreck this room? It wouldn't take you 2 seconds to upturn things. Like, you wouldn't even need to think about it, make a mess. Whereas if I said, can you reorganize this room? That would take a lot more thought processes for you, and it would take you far longer, and you might need to come up with a plan.
And this funnels into that task initiation side of things as well, because it's what part do we start with? Because we keep going into the tidy the room scenario, but I think it's sometimes the easiest one to
Yeah.
give examples. But if you put that child in the room and ask them to do it, the initiation of the task would be difficult, because it's where do you start? Do I pick up my trains first? Do I put my dolls away? Whereas initiating into that task is often, and you might find even sort of spending, I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute with them, going first things first, put your bricks away. That will initiate the task for them, so then they can flow and carry on with it. So sometimes that can just be little simple things in terms of language and stuff like that
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. And I think that leads into kind of like playing as well. You know,
Mhm.
why do they always need me to come and play with them? Like, I need to go, you have to go and do the cooking, you have to go and do the washing.
Yeah.
You've got things you need to do, and you've got these kids that are constantly like, I'm bored. I need you to play with me, and it's because they can't do that task initiation and get going on something. Whereas if you provide them with the start, a lot of children can then continue the play. Um,
And boredom tends to be often, I feel, a word that's used quite a lot, going, I'm bored, and it's less being that they're bored. And I think also bored is a term that they use to sort of initiate that conversation
yeah,
as well, where it's actually they're not bored, they just don't know what to do with themselves. They jump on the trampoline for
yeah,
5 minutes and I'm bored now, and it's like, no, but you've only done it for
yeah.
5 minutes. So we, in terms of strategies and things like that, so we'll try and funnel some strategies as we go through. We
Oh
don't want
yeah,
to keep
no,
telling you all the things that may be difficult, but things like that, we often say maybe creating like an activity box. Pinterest is always a wonderful place to go, whereas you can create, I don't know, little cards that have got activities on them. You could color code those cards. You can do 10-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute activities. But we always say with doing this sort of thing is support that task initiation. So on that card, either put a picture, rather than putting build some Lego, put several different ones. It's like build a car, build a train, build a bridge, build a house. So you're aiding in that task initiation again with drawing. Give them things to draw, because even at that time that you might find, oh, they don't want to build a car, they don't want to build a house, even just starting off that task as a car may evolve into
it
something,
sparks off something
yeah,
else, doesn't it, for
something
them to
more.
get going on? Like, actually, I don't want to do a car. I want to do a flying whatever.
Yeah.
But you've given them that initial idea to go off
Definitely.
with. An executive function is still developing, can I just say, until it's the age of 25, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a long process to keep on developing, and it tends to be that females get to that executive functioning, like top level, far quicker than boys. But then if you add in any neurodiversity or, dyslexia, dyspraxia, anything like that, that they're going to struggle with executive function, that's going to delay it. So,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean if you've got poor executive functioning that it's the end of the world. There are
No.
lots and lots of strategies that we'll say throughout the series of the podcast that we can do to support you. But there are many things you can do to support it. It's not, well, I've always got poor executive function, I'm
Yeah.
always going to have poor planning or poor emotional control. there's many apps, there's games that you can play, loads of things that you can do to support yourself and others with it.
I often link back as well and have conversations with parents. If you think going back to that study that was done around ADHD and the 3 to 5 years behind, actually, if you think looking at from a developmental sort of way, the difference between a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old, that's quite a large disparity in terms of the things that they're able to do in their communication styles, in their friendships and things like that. Whereas you think the disparity between, I don't know, a 30-year-old and a 35-year-old, there isn't that big of a difference. Now, if you have things put in place to support yourself, so a little bit insight about me, but I am diagnosed with dyslexia, so I therefore do struggle with my executive functioning. However, there are lots of things that I have in place for my day-to-day life in work. So I am able to support and manage a therapy team as well as doing my day job, as well as doing my personal life, because I utilize lots of different things like apps, so to-do lists, timers. We often ensure that follow up of conversations, there's an email, or during meetings we take notes. Even for this podcast, me and Abby are surrounded by lovely pieces of paper to make sure that we keep on track and we plan our podcast to make sure we give you the information. So a lot of the times there can be that concern and those questions of, well, are they always going to struggle? Are they always going to have these big disparities? Now, we can't say for definite, because it's that horrible saying of how long's a piece of string. But actually, when you put these things in place and each individual will find things that suit them better, we can still support the executive functioning, and an individual can thrive and utilize their strengths by just having those little adaptations through life to make sure that they're ensuring.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that self-awareness of themselves as they get older, and if they know that this, actually my planning I really struggle with, or my time management is really poor, like there are lots of things that they can put in place as long as they are aware of those difficulties.
Now, we've run off a little bit and spoke about executive function, and obviously you know that this whole series that we're doing is about executive functioning. So our following episodes will dive more into planning, organising, we'll dive more into emotional control. But obviously this episode we're talking about that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. So now we've given you a little bit of an overview on executive functioning. If we fall back into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, if you think when an individual is in overwhelm, when they are in that point of they're struggling, they've ran away, they've sort of lashed out, or they've frozen, they can't respond, that ability, that executive functioning is, I use a term, thrown out the window
Yeah. Well,
basically.
it's going back to the Ham model of a brain,
Mm.
isn't it? So going back to the Dan Siegel, it's with the Ham model of a brain, the emotional regulation, the planning, the prioritizing, that logical thought and reasoning literally flips.
Mm.
And then all you have is your emotions left, and there's no emotional regulation going on. So I know when my executive functioning goes, I cry. I cry about everything, whether I'm happy, whether I'm sad, whether I'm angry. That's the emotion that comes out. And it might be that you see that within yourselves or within others, but it could be anger, it could be tears, it could even be the laughter,
Yeah.
because we often see that kind of, I'm gonna laugh, and you're like,
It's the
"That's-"
panic. Yeah,
yeah.
it's the panic. And I think the reason for this, and when it comes to things like sort of that emotional overwhelm, a little while ago I had an assessment where the child unfortunately did get into overwhelm, and we just found that in that moment, no matter what you're offering, no matter what you're trying to provide, all those strategies that 100% work, that they love a cuddle, they love sitting in a den in their bedroom, all those things that work, don't work in those moments, because the lid is flipped, the executive function is disengaged, and they are only running on their fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And it's often trying to think in that moment what's the best thing to do. Now, if you have a child that can become quite volatile and they do throw things and lash out, we often say at that point you have to go into sort of safety zone, remove yourself from the room, or sort of pick up pillows, sofa cushions, and make sure they're between yourself and the child. But at that point, you have to sort of run through the emotion to allow the executive function to re-engage before you can come up with logical ways to support. So we often talk about sort of appropriate release of frustration. Now, this is brilliant, but you have to do all the work around the outside of encouraging the individual to do that when they're at states of regulation and calm, and using sort of language to encourage them to do that, because in that moment of fight, flight, freeze, fawn response,
they physically can't.
No.
And we will talk more about that, like appropriate release of
Yeah.
frustration and things, next week, and how you can support these children and young adults when they are in that state where their lid is flipped and it's just emotional control that's gone. So we will support you with that in the coming weeks as well. But yeah.
I think that's quite a nice follow on. So basically, each episode we're trying to make roughly sort of 30 minutes. So I feel like that's quite a nice place to stop for today. And yeah, we'll sort of dive more into executive functioning next week.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to The Sensational Life with Bibic. Can you think of anything that you can do to support yourselves or others? We'd love to hear from you. We'll be back next week with emotional control. And then if you have any questions or stories you would like to share, head on over to our Facebook and Instagram page.
Yeah, you just typing in Bibic into the search bar, you can find us on there. We also have an email address for our podcast, and this is literally thesensationallife@bibic.org.uk. So if there is anything in terms of, again, stories, if you wanted any specific resources that we've mentioned today as well, we can send those over to you via that email. Obviously, just allow us a little bit of time to get back to you, because we might not always be super prompt with that email, but we'll do our best. But yeah, if you'd like to subscribe as well, we'd really love that, because hopefully this is going to be really useful for everyone. Even write us a little review. I know on Spotify you can write a little review.
Yeah, that would be good.
Give us 5 stars and things like that. Would be amazing, because we really just want to give everyone lots and lots of information.
Yeah, please share. If you hear our podcast and you think it'd be good for others, please do share it around, because we'd love to get the name out and as much support out for people as possible.
Yeah, amazing. So keep it sensational.